Today is February 21st. It's the 52nd day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. If you've been listening since the very first day, some of this may sound a little familiar to you. If you've joined after that, it'll all be new. Either way, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Brand spanking new episodes coming very soon. On this day in 1885, a 554-foot tall obelisk made of marble and granite is dedicated in honor of President George Washington in Washington, D.C. The Washington Monument has taken 37 years to build, with construction on hold for 23 of those years due to lack of funding in the time before and after the Civil War. The original design calls for a ring of columns surrounding the obelisk, with a statue of Washington driving a chariot atop the colonnade. That feature is left out of the final design due to lack of funding. Sometimes things just work out the way they're supposed to. When it's dedicated on this day in 1885, the Washington Monument is the world's tallest structure, until the Eiffel Tower comes along 4 years later. Every day, people take dozens of photos with their phones. Photos of their friends, of their food, and, of course, themselves. But a century ago, the average person might have 1 or 2 photographs of themselves. Pics of them dressed in their Sunday's finest, and most likely looking rather serious and dour. It's an important event. The only photograph you'll have taken of you in your entire life. All that changes when Edwin Land stands before a meeting of the Optical Society of America and demonstrates his invention, the Polaroid Land camera, the first instant camera, on this day in 1947. Until this point, if you want to take a photograph, you need a light meter to set the proper exposure, you have to dial in the focus, and then wind the film after you've snapped the shutter, remove the negative, and bathe it in a series of chemicals in order to produce a photograph. It's not rocket science, but it's messy, and it requires time to learn and practice in order to take a halfway decent picture, let alone a good picture. And the whole process is generally inaccessible to most people. Edwin Land wants to design a camera that is easy for anyone to use, that makes all those adjustments automatically. He invents a product people don't even know they want: the instant camera. Born in 1909 in Connecticut, Land studies chemistry at Harvard for a year before dropping out and heading to New York to start experimenting with polarizing filters and film for cameras. He forms a company with George Wheelwright, one of his former professors at Harvard, and in 1937, they renamed their eponymous company the Polaroid Corporation. They continue to create polarizing lenses for a wide variety of applications until this day in 1947, when Edwin Land demonstrates his instant camera for the first time. The Polaroid Land camera revolutionizes the industry, and over the next 20 to 30 years brings the joy of photography to millions upon millions of people who would never otherwise have experienced it. Photo albums are filled with pictures of birthdays, vacations, graduations, and gatherings, documenting the important events in the average person's life. Land continues to refine the instant camera and invent new products, which he introduces in theatrically choreographed demonstrations at Polaroid's annual shareholders meetings. And he inspires another young college dropout who also has visions of technologies that people don't yet know they want. Steve Jobs meets Edwin Land in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Former Apple CEO John Sculley, who was there for the meeting, writes in his autobiography that Land was saying, quote, "I could see what the Polaroid camera should be. It was just as real to me as if it was sitting in front of me before I had ever built one." And for Steve Jobs, it is exactly the same. For his vision of the Macintosh computer, of the iPod, of the iPhone, the iPad. Many years later, Edwin Land is forced out of Polaroid, and after he passes away in 1991, The advent of the smartphone signals the demise of the Polaroid Corporation. In a way, Land inspires the man, who eventually destroys the company he built. But the influence of Edwin Land's instant camera is more present today than it ever has been. Today, by some estimates, almost 97% of the world's population, more than 6.5 billion people, carry around an instant camera in their back pocket on those very same smartphones and mobile devices. And well over 600 million people use a photo-sharing app, the name of which is a blend of the terms instant camera and telegram. Instagram. Malcolm X knows the Nation of Islam is trying to kill him. He told Gordon Parks as much 2 days ago. When he takes the stage at the Audubon Ballroom in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan on this day in 1965, a disturbance breaks out in the audience. People are yelling, and Malcolm X tries to calm the crowd. It is at this moment that a shot rings out. 3 men fire towards the stage with a shotgun and handguns. Malcolm X is hit in the chest with the first round of buckshot and dies shortly thereafter at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. He is 39 years old. Malcolm X is born Malcolm Little in 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. His father, Earl Little, is a Baptist minister and a vocal civil rights activist. Earl is the target of repeated death threats from white supremacists. The family moves out of state to Michigan, but the death threats follow them. Their family home is burned to the ground when Malcolm is 4 years old, and 2 years later, his father, Earl, is dead, officially run over by a trolley car, unofficially murdered by white supremacists. Despite all of this, Malcolm is an excellent student. However, his teachers make it clear that there's no place for him in a white world. By age 20, he's serving 8 to 10 in prison for larceny. While in prison, he finds the teachings of Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad, and by the time he is paroled, he's a devoted follower. He changes his name to Malcolm X, becomes a minister and a national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, bringing thousands of new followers to the fold and becoming a very visible figure in the media. But when he becomes disillusioned with Elijah Muhammad, in part due to Muhammad's multiple marital infidelities, Malcolm breaks from the Nation of Islam. After a pilgrimage to Mecca, he returns to the U.S. with a new perspective on integration and the potential for race relations, and on the future, which he now sees as full of hope. Soon after his return, he begins receiving death threats. Except, unlike the death threats his father received from white supremacists, the death threats made to Malcolm X come from the Nation of Islam. His home in East Elmhurst, New York is firebombed, and 1 week later, on this day in 1965, he steps on the stage at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights. When he is buried at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, his friends take the shovels away from the gravediggers and bury Malcolm X themselves. There are 314 days left in the year.